Okay, I'm gonna make it clear right here. Like to those of you who are listening, let me make my stand very clear. I am very against this bill because I just said like in and of itself the bill is good, but like taking consideration of other factors, it is very, very bad. Number one, when you really look at the percentage of teenage pregnancies, and this is where the bill gets very misleading. It starts off with a statistic that says we have like this percentage of teenage mothers and we have this much. If you look at it historically, since 2017, the number of teenage pregnancies as a percentage of the population in the Philippines has decreased over time. In
Mm.
2017, the percentage of teenage mothers who were pregnant aged 15 to 19 years old was 8.6%. Now, as of 2022, that statistic is 5.4%.
Okay, awesome, awesome.
Yeah,
Well, well, first of all, how was your week, Chris?
like it was pretty good. Last time we were on the show, a couple of things happened. It was Chinese New Year, so happy Chinese New Year to everyone who celebrated.
The year of the snake.
Yeah, it's the year of the snake, and we just had our typical dinner. We just had dumplings. We had dumplings. We had noodles, and I think according to my mother, who practices this tradition more than I have because I've been away for a while. If you need to have like steamed fish, and that's a sign of good luck and prosperity. I think that was one of them, and another one was like you had to wear red, and like I guess I'm not gonna be as lucky as my family members are because like they all wear really really red shirts. I wore like a very plain maroon shirt.
Dang,
So
the
yeah,
closest red you can find.
yeah, that was the close. Like red is not a good color on me, and so I never buy any red shirts. If I wear a red shirt and with my body size, I look like a I look like a tomato. I look like a
Tomato,
tomato that
cherry,
stands out.
a big cherry.
Yeah, that's why I never buy red. How
Oh,
about you? Like, well,
I
like
mean,
you guys celebrated, right?
yeah, we went out and ate. Well, we initially that day of the eve of it, we made what is it? Buns, I guess. And then actually today we had some dim sum and a hot pot. So very Chinese oriented foods.
You guys
It's
had
pretty
like
good.
Chinese New Year for like the whole week. Like we just had it for
Kind
like
of.
one day, and the leftovers was like the next day. Like you guys had it for like the whole
Yeah.
week.
Do you say it's Chinese New Year's or is it the Lunar New Year?
So we say Chinese New Year, but like I don't. Is there controversy to that? Like
Of
I've
course
seen
there
people
is.
say like,
What do you think
What's
about
the story?"
Taiwan? They celebrate Chinese New Year's or they celebrate Lunar
Oh,
New
I
Year's?
see. Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. I don't really think about it because I'm in the Philippines. I'm like, okay, all I know is that my ancestors immigrated from China, and like the Philippines, they say Chinese New Year. And I guess with the growing controversy, I think people have started to say Lunar New Year, which is
It's I guess it
interesting.
is equivalent to, I mean, I don't have any strong ties to one or the other, but I think it's equivalent to the United States having Merry Christmas or Happy Holidays.
Yeah. It's like okay, like I think it's just I think it's ridiculous. But then again, I shouldn't be saying it because like in the Philippines, we're very Christian based.
Hmm.
Actually, to be more precise, we're very Catholic based, and so obviously we're going to say Merry Christmas because like majority of the population here are Catholics, and that's what we say. We never really think about Happy Holidays and all that stuff. It just never occurs to us, and it never even occurred to me
Oh
while I
yeah,
was in the States. Yeah.
I didn't. It didn't occur to me until like I can see where people's frustrations are coming from. I
Right.
can see it, but at the same time, there's also like, what's the harm of just giving in? But at the same time, it's probably the principle that's more frustrating than the actual thing. Because I
Right.
mean, it's not like Christmas is hurting anybody per se. It's if anything, people are giving gifts, and there's a feeling of cheer, I guess.
Right. I think it's just like the name of the holiday. I mean, I remember specifically at work, like we were told not to say Merry Christmas because there are some people who take offense of it. And I was like, that was the first time it hit me. Like it's very
Uh,
different in other places' culture. And I'm like, really, that's how much of a big deal it is. And I don't know. I've never had anyone like I've never in my life ever had anyone come up to say to me like, "How dare you say Merry Christmas?" Like it's very culturally insensitive or religiously insensitive and stuff. I've never had anyone come up to me like that. So like, okay, like, all
But
right,
you see the point though, right? Where I mean there are people that are maybe atheists or people of other faiths
right,
that I can see, like, if you think about it really hard, I can understand where they're coming from. But in particularly the United States, it
yeah,
does have that Judeo-Christian values, which is actually funny in terms of like how it relates to Christmas because it's like, well, if you're Jewish, if you're, it's like you might not want to hear that, but there's also the underlying understanding that even people that aren't religious or like aren't religious say it out of politeness, and also it's just that word is not exact. Although the roots comes from
right.
Christendom, it's it's not
It's
exactly
it's
100%. I mean, even companies use it as a marketing gimmick,
yeah.
and it's it's not. Maybe this is the wrong way to say it, but like it's not that deep. Like to simplify everything, it's not that deep.
No, it's
But
not. Like it was very interesting how we've come to that. I think I don't know. I can't really tell for other people. For me, if you're gonna ask me, I think my default is just gonna be Merry Christmas, and for Chinese New Year, like Happy Chinese New Year, because that's just how I grew up. That's just my default. If anyone would take offense at it,
mm,
I mean, like I'm just gonna
I
like
mean,
change it and
I think it's a
get it
culture
out of the
thing.
way.
I
Yeah,
just realized like it's more of a culture thing because like there's a lot of Hollywood movies about it that kind of spreads that cheerful expectations, I guess, of what Christmas should
right.
be, and it makes me think, what what is the what is like the Muslim equivalence, or like there isn't any cultural movies that I'm aware of, or Hindi like equivalents of something around that time period
Right.
that makes you want to say something else. Like you kind of just want to say Merry Christmas, not like not there's nothing out there that I'm aware of that makes you want to say something else.
Yeah,
Like
I mean, like like I think it just people should just say what they grew up with because like what are the like really honestly? So if you grew up in a Jewish community, for example, for Jewish, all right, like it's Hanukkah, was it? Happy
yeah,
Hanukkah. So if you grew up in a Jewish community, most likely than not, you're gonna be interacting with Jewish people. And so for you, it's going to be safer to say Happy Hanukkah because most of
mhm,
your network, most of the people that you interact with, it's going to be people who also say Happy Hanukkah. But for like, if you grew up Christian and like if you grew up non-denominational, I suppose in some
mhm.
sense, then it's always safer to go with what you grew up with. I don't think that we should enforce or like coerce people to start saying like specific terms. It's just like,
Yeah.
yeah,
Well,
yeah,
I mean, well, I'm talking about it from the United States perspective, like being a citizen here. But it kind of makes me think that, like you said, you don't want to enforce, but like in a way, the government stance on being as neutral as possible, saying Happy
hmm,
Holidays, officially speaking, for government workers, is probably the most neutral position you can take. Like it's probably the most tame, but at the same time, now then it could rub maybe Christians the wrong way. But
mm,
I mean, I would actually side more if the government is more, yeah, like leaning towards like not an official stance. I mean, the government workers can have their own opinions and thoughts, which is not
right.
representative of the U.S. government itself. So maybe leave it up to this, like the federal government shouldn't say anything about it per se, and then or you should not force a certain way of thinking. And then from the state's perspective, I don't think they should do that either. But then they have more autonomy than the federal government.
Hmm.
That's
I,
how
I
I see
would
it.
think I would actually think that you, if you're government, if you're like say the president, I think you would, I would have thought that would have been okay to just say what you're kind of used to as well. Not that not that you represent them, not that you favor them in a way, but it's just like your background and how you grew up with. I mean, I don't you think we take it too far when we say when a president says "Merry Christmas" that we start to think, oh, he's associating himself more with Christians and he doesn't really care about anyone else. This don't you think we take that kind of too far in our thinking
I mean,
when we do say
I
that?
don't necessarily think that, because as we're talking about this, I see the bridge between that and, I guess, people with that have certain pronouns to their names, like
Right.
to who they believe themselves as. And so the way that, like, there's Merry Christmas or Happy Holidays, like sometimes, like, Happy Holidays is probably the most neutral form you can take. And
Hmm.
the president of the United States of America represents the United States, and although we are
Mm.
a hodgepodge, like there's so many different cultures. It's probably you can't please everybody,
Right.
I think. And also, what's funny is I believe that every single president of the United States has been Christian, at the very least, politically speaking, has stated they are actually Christian.
Okay.
uh, and so and only, I think we only had like one or two presidents that were Catholic, if you want to make a distinction there.
Was
uh
there?
yes, it's shoot, I don't want to say it because I'm gonna mess up my presidents, but it's,
Okay.
yeah, it's one of the
So
more
there were
prominent.
two.
Yeah, I think it's
Okay.
actually just one. um it might be RFK, but I could be wrong. I'm pretty sure it's RFK. That one of the issues that kind of came up politically was the separation of church and state, and supposedly how if somebody is, if the president is Catholic, then they are under the Pope per se, right? So like under the Vatican, which is its own country technically. And so there was that issue. But going back to like the what the president should be saying, with, like, if somebody with certain pronoun preferences tells you
Hmm.
who, like, what they are saying, who they identify as, this is where I think as an individual, well, it depends on where, there's so many, it depends, but generally speaking, you should, I personally would, like, okay, that's your pronouns, like that, sure, let's go with that. But then in terms of when we're actually talking politics or policy, that's when you, like, the syntax isn't as important as actual the meat of the argument. And so,
Right.
like, the president saying happy holidays is the most neutral term, while saying Merry Christmas leans the United States in one way, which, however, like, it does. So it's not, it's like
Yeah.
stating the fact.
It's one of those things that you can't really do anything about. I guess you do have a point. Like if he does, if he is supposed to represent the people, then you would have to try and not be too associative to respect the diversity and of religion and culture in the United States. I honestly, I can understand that. I do not necessarily like lean with it, and I still think it seems kind of far fetched to me, but it does make sense. I mean, if that works for you guys, I just think like it seems very strange. Like I think sometimes we do tend to take it too far. We associate it with it too much, but then the things like you know what's really scary is or really what I see is really ignorant is that we're so sensitive to what people say, what these officials say about policies or like about anything that seems associative. We're so sensitive to that. We don't really look at the policies that they're creating and what it's actually supporting.
Mhm.
Like that for me is like a very dangerous slope. We're very concerned about what they do and say in the media, but what are the laws that are being passed? who is it helping and who is it benefiting, and which group would stand to benefit most from it. Some of us sometimes we're so ignorant for that, and I think that is one of the cases with Philippine law sometimes. Hope we're not at the point, at least in Philippines, and from my observational perspective, we're not at the point where we're very critical about what the leaders say for like a specific holiday or what they call it, because again, most the population of the Philippines, most of them are Christian or Catholic denomination. Not to say that they're different things, they're one and the same thing. Most of them are just Catholic, if you want to be very specific.
Mm-hmm.
Arguably, the number of people who are Christian has been decreasing over the years, because you do have people who say that they are Catholic or say that they are Christian and they don't really practice it, and then it's obviously going to lead to more like like in our church, like what we say it is apostasy in our terms. You have more people falling away from that religion. Okay, we're not at that point yet, but we're also not at the point where where we look very closely at the policies and who really benefits which from what. And like this
No,
is one of the things that
it's funny that like, we're getting into the weeds of things already, but it kind of makes me think. So in some ways, this is why in the United States it's a democratic republican republic,
right,
in which we kind of we elect people to represent that population, and we hope that they actually do their best to represent that population well, because then there's just too much, like what you were like, too much stuff going into the weeds and figuring
Right.
out what somebody's motivations are for
right,
selecting a certain bill. There's just too much of that. It's almost like, you know, how the really sophisticated individual would have a financial advisor, because there's just, the world is just too complicated. Like you can't do everything on your own. So like you get a
Right.
financial advisor to do this, like you kind of trust a realtor. So then you still do your due diligence to protect within your sphere of influence, but then you outreach to those people. And in the same way
Right.
with our politicians in the United States, where like these elected officials, there's just too much stuff for the one individual to think about. And so that elected official should be working at their best ability to help represent the people that voted them, and not for this more grandiose version of what the world
Mhm.
should look like. But with that being said, Chris, you mentioned like throughout this week that you saw a couple articles regarding something happening in the Philippines. You want to
Yeah,
bring that
that's
up?
one of the things that I was actually looking forward to talking to, because there was so much controversy, and
So
like kind
what
of
is
like
it
a nice change of
exactly?
it's a sexual education bill. It's the CSE bill, bill 1979, not 1979 is what they're proposing. It's proposed by Senator Risa Hontiveros, and there's a lot of details that are we're trying to go into. Let me start with trying to explain what it is. So
Mhm.
in and of itself, so from the bill itself, the plan and the intention is to educate adolescents. And when you say adolescents, these are people aged from 10 to 21 years old. We are trying to educate that population into having a better sexual education system, to teach them about the reproductive system, teach them about safe sex, teach them about teenage pregnancy, the impacts of pregnancy in your
Yeah.
social and economic life.
Mhm.
And that is really the basis of it.
Mhm.
That is the intention, because in the Philippines we have an astounding number of people who get pregnant in their teenage years. And it's unsurprising really that you see that population. Like it's not uncommon if you're a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and you served your mission in the Philippines, or if you just visited the Philippines in general and you visited the slums and the squatters areas, you would notice that there are a lot of families who have children who are in their teenage years who are already pregnant or have kids of their own, which is like, okay, obviously it's like it's like trying to address an economic problem, because you're having more people who you cannot really sustain and support, and there's not much of a family planning that's going on. And so that was the proposal for the bill. And the media, I think, in my opinion, I think the media was not doing a good job at portraying what the bill actually was. I think it was more reactive in a sense, but really what the bill was trying to say is, so what it's basically trying to do, if you go into the details of it, it's just trying to protect the rights of people to access to education and access to
Yeah.
facilities to help them with their teenage pregnancy. Like if if you are not pregnant, then we're just trying to educate you about the dangers of teenage pregnancy. If you already are pregnant, then there are also facilities and also resources that are available to you so that we will be able to help you, and that there are also family planning resources so that this doesn't happen. Because there is also an astounding number, like with teenagers who end up getting pregnant, there is an astounding number of people who have repeat teenage pregnancies, meaning that's not the only kid that they have during their teenage years. And they don't
Mhm.
really plan for it. And what that happens on a macroeconomic scale is that you have more people who don't complete their education, who can't really find a good job, who don't really know how to handle a family, and therefore, economic wise, they cannot really earn more income and spend more. And so that's already very, very complicated on it. So that was the intention of the bill. And if you ask me, the bill in and of itself, the bill will do more benefit than good. But that, or well, sorry, it has more benefit for good than it does benefit for evil in it and of itself.
Okay. So I'm not. I've only brushed on a little bit on that topic. But like, what, like, what is it? What are the main detractors saying against this bill? Because you
Mm,
mentioned this bill addresses particularly the knowledge in terms of what safe sex is.
right.
Like, is because from what I'm understanding now is are the detractors saying that rather than the schools, or in other words, like public schools, the government trying to teach people of that age regarding what safe sex is,
Right.
certain reproductive parts, they'd rather not have that, but rather the responsibility should fall under the parents. Like, what's
So
the other
that's
side
another
of
thing.
this?
Like, I don't think so with this bill. I don't think that there's going to be anything that enforces, like, if you were like if teenagers got pregnant, there's nothing in the bill that says the parents now have to take care of the child of that teenager.
Hmm.
There has never been a bill that passed or was enforced where the person who is actually earning income in the family has to take care of the child who was born out of wedlock. There was never any rule about that. The only reason that we have and we see a lot of parents who take care of the children of their teenagers is because it's only out of the kindness of their hearts. There was never any
Right.
enforcement by it.
Yes. I mean, what does the bill do exactly? If you can run it down.
Right. So that's another tricky part. It's basically just trying to I the oversimplification of it is it's trying to provide more resources and access to better healthcare to teenage mothers. The thing that's kind of scratching my head about this bill is like we're trying to say we should have more education, we need to have a better curriculum.
Hmm.
Basically, teaching this, like the age of where you teach sexual education is now lower. You start it at the age of 10, and there's like a pre-education that people are talking about. I have not seen this in this bill. I've only seen it that as in and of itself the bill says educating 10-year-olds. So that's all it says. In my experience, the earliest that I learned about it was when I was probably in 6th grade, and I was around 12 years old at the time. So it's only 2 years younger. But if I'm being completely honest, that's when they first taught about the reproductive system. I had no idea what the purpose of the reproductive system was. I didn't know
Hmm.
it until I was like later on in high school. I did not understand any of it. And so if I'm correct, it's just trying to be better detailed in explaining what sexual education is,
Hmm.
because the school system currently, our system does not really do that. And I think the basis for that is because we see a lot of countries. I think the Philippines has drawn a lot of conclusions where they saw a lot of correlation to. They saw a lot of correlation with having earlier sex education means more responsible, more responsible reproductive and sexual activities when they're older. I think that was the conclusion that they drew, but the problem was that is it was more of a correlation. If you look at those with countries, it's only more of a correlation than it is causation. But like, I'll go deeper into that. Like, what was your question? Like, what? Yeah, you seem to have a follow up after that. Yeah.
Well, really primarily because this bill, just from I read a little bit about it, and just
Right.
like as you were saying it, like kind of better clarified in my mind that this to me sounds like a feel good bill, in which politicians are like, we are against bad things happening. They get the cheers going. It's like, and then
Wait,
now they
expand on what you mean, like a feel
what
good feel.
a feel good bill is a bill that is so obvious. It's almost like an example just coming out of my head is like, we want to help homeless people. Like, we are for the homeless. Like, we want to take care of you. And who's gonna say no to that? Like at a political level, it's like it's so obvious. Or like everybody should have free internet. Like it's like we are against fires. Like we're here to like help protect your property. It's like who's not like who is the opposite of this? Who is the opposite of what you're saying? Because like that's so basic, and I'm pretty sure that the government existed before like we elected people.
Right.
The certain contracts within people have already existed before that. So it's like it's just real stating something so obvious, but to get clout for it. And it's like, okay, like who's against that? Because then if you're against that, you can also just label that person as X, Y, and Z. Like they're not of a good mindset.
They're not with it. So like,
they're
if
not
I
with the
understand it,
program.
right. So like, if I'm understanding
Mhm.
it, how you're defining it correctly, is you're saying that because the politicians need to make face, they put on a bill that would make them look good to the public, and they're trying to take advantage of that.
Because I'm thinking about it. Who is for teen pregnancy? Like who is for that? Like who are these enemies that we're trying to like kind of single out, and like the reason why this bill existed, like, and so it kind of just makes me think like, isn't that common sense? It's almost like we're gonna have a bill so that cars don't hit people on the road. Like hello, like that's so dang obvious, and I think it's already existed. Like it's one of those things where if you're against it, you're gonna be labeled a bad person. And so
Right.
this is why I'm like, is there something that I'm missing? Because like for me, what I'm trying to look at this from all different angles, and then an angle that I can see why there are people that are detractors from this bill is that they don't appreciate the school teaching their kids this at the age of 10, 11, 12.
Mhm.
So from that point of view, I can at the very least understand where they're coming from. But then on the other side, what if a kid grows up without those good parents, So there are a lot of people that grow up without that knowledge, and then they can be taken advantage of. So
Right.
from that point of view, I understand maybe where the government is trying to cover people's blind spots. But like that's to me looking at both sides. If this is how I'm defining it correctly, this is how it's supposed to be perceived. Because then at least this way, there can be some sort of communication without labeling one side, like evil or like per se. But like if you're talking about just giving them the knowledge or like the resources, like I mean, it sounds good. Now this is why it's like getting into the weeds of it. What's their motivation? Like, is this actually going to help people, or is this another one of those the government funds it and then like let's say 2 to 5% actually goes to the people it's supposed to be directed at?
Right.
So
like I'm very glad that you brought that up. I'm really happy that you brought that up, because Now, like you said, we're getting into the weeds of it. Like as I said earlier, in and of itself, the bill has really good intentions. And if we were just gonna go on the basis of what the bill says, and if it actually comes to pass, then it's really good. Now we put in other factors. Let's start with what you said earlier about like a feel good bill, about politicians trying to save face or look good in the public. Let's start with the one who proposed the bill. So Senator Risa Hontiveros, and for a lot of there's going to be a lot of people in the United States who don't know about her. I don't know if a
Yep.
lot of
I don't.
Filipinos know
I don't
about
know
her.
her.
Yeah, you don't. She's not as famous. She's not going to be famous as Trump. But anyway, she's one of the people who a lot of people know about. I would say people who are very well versed in current events and in political events, they would know about her. So one of her reputations among people, some of the people I've asked, is that she's one of the politicians who people don't really like. That a lot of her policies are not exactly in the best interest of Filipinos. So there's that. There she has that track record. She has that kind of stain. And so that's already with her and associated with her. And so when you mentioned the save face, what was it like?
Like feel
Feel
good
good,
bills.
yeah, feel good bills. Yeah, that's one of the things that first came to my mind. She was a person who with not a very strong
Popular.
reputation, yeah,
Yeah.
popular reputation of for the people, but like this bill would definitely help save face. Now, another thing about it is like when you go into the bill, like one of the reasons that we have this bill is because we're also trying to protect young people who are becoming predators of older men who would take advantage of these teenage girls. There are people like that, and there are news about it. And I
Hmm.
guess the intent, like one of the intentions, was to protect those young women from those people who would take advantage of that.
Like
But
predators.
right, from predators. The problem with this, and they thought that having teaching education to younger kids is
Hmm.
going to be effective. I would argue that it's not going to be as effective because like
As what is the counter? Like
the
you
counter
mentioned,
would be
it's not gonna be as effective, but compared
right.
to what?
Yeah, I was gonna get that. So
Oh, sorry.
the counter, yeah, the counter would be you need to have sexual education in the home. That is as basic as it gets. If you look at the countries who taught sexual education in their school system to younger children, you will also see that these countries, these the culture is that you would have parents sit down with the children and talk about it and help them like process the information that they get at school. Think about how the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints functions, especially with the Come Follow Me manual. What it's supposed to happen is that we're supposed to teach these principles in the home, and then the church is only supposed to support that. It's going to provide a very general guideline. That's the key word there, general. General does not very work with specific family units because we all have very different situations. The family is responsible, the father and the mother are responsible for teaching this to their children. And I think this is a consequence of what we've lacked. If if you were someone who taught this in your home, and if you were someone who practiced give giving proper advice and guidance to your children, like you're present every step of the way and you're not like an absentee father or mother, then you should have no problems with this bill. It should.
Huh.
It should. Yeah. Yeah.
That's
That's what I think about it. The problem is that there's not a lot of people who do about it, and that's the reason why a lot of these are happening in low income households. Is because you don't have a father or mother figure who really sit down and talk to their children about it, and it never really
hmm.
gets addressed. If you really want to solve
Yeah,
that issue,
because that's really interesting. Because I would think that the more active parents would actually have a bigger problem with schools teaching this because they're teaching their children, the ones like they're teaching them specifics or like on the minutia, like the specifics about their cases. Now, with that being said, the school, like you mentioned, teaches it at a more general. And sometimes I would understand a parent's concern that the way it's being taught is actually
right?
taught incorrectly if not downright the opposite of what the parents want to teach them.
Right.
So I could see that concern really bubbling up, because let's say the parents have that more traditional Christian value, but then maybe the school is more hookup culture is completely common and normal, and so this is what you need to do. And then so it's like, I can understand that, while parents that aren't as hands-on with their kids, I mean, they don't, I guess, like they'll just take whatever they can, right, to help maybe help their kid learn a topic that's a little uncomfortable. But I kind of want to bring it back to my personal experience, because for us, I remember we had the option to opt out. I think this is a good middle ground between those two, where there is going to be like a what a class is this? Like let's just say there's a particular class to teach, maybe a week or two of for reproductive parts. And so what would happen is you can but to attend this class, we're all going to go and do that class, but here is a permission slip that you give to your parents. They should read it, and if they don't like it, then they sign something, and then that means that's your get out of the class free card, and then you do something else. And when I remember correctly, that's during our PE class or something. And so it's like, okay, well, if you're not gonna watch the videos or understand them explain X, Y, and Z, it's
purely education.
You have recess or something instead. And so, but I think now that I look back, I think it should be the opposite. I think for your kid to actually attend that class, your parents have to say yes to it. If for your kid will automatically not be in that class unless your parents sign on, because to be honest, when I was kind of growing up, I also didn't want to just bother my parents as much as possible. And so what happens is sometimes some things that they're supposed to read, and then because their silence means it's a yes, supposedly, right? And so I'm sure there's a lot of kids also that they were told by adults to let their parents see this. No, I don't want to do that, or they're too busy, or so many excuses.
Right.
And so because of that, now they're in this class and they're maybe they weren't ready for it. And so it should be the opposite, but I think that's a good middle ground. But I mean, let's just go back to the principles and the fundamentals of this particular bill.
Right.
The issue is that there are too many younger people, from my understanding, too many lower income families that kind of perpetuate this circle of poverty because they don't have as many opportunities to learn and grow because they're already taking care of a kid. Is that what I'm getting at here? Is that what it seems to be the main concern?
What you're saying is the concern not even have the capabilities economically or financially to be able to provide another kid that these teenagers would have? Is that what you're asking?
Yes. Because I'm thinking about it. Okay. So I think, we've been in that age before. And so it's perfectly normal to have certain feelings and kind of act on them in a way. But I think the most important thing is recognizing the consequences of those actions.
Right.
I mean, if somebody is a mother and if somebody is willing to potentially, have the potential to become a future father or future mother, I mean, I might not agree with it morally at a particular age, but this is where, as long as they're informed, the masses, the people can make their own decisions. And I mean, wasn't it just recently that the Philippines, before your graduation, was at the age of 16, a high school? And so in some ways, when I think about that, I think about, well, that means that the Philippine government kind of, and maybe the culture kind of puts it that 16 is the age of consent is how, like, or 16 up. Am I wrong in this? Am I wrong in my thinking? Because
No,
in the
the age
United
of
States, it's about
consent.
18. Like
So
18, yeah.
right, yeah. So with the Philippines, it's actually a little complicated. The age of you graduate high school typically. Well, years ago, before the K to 12 program, before they extended school, it was you graduated at 16, and now I think you would graduate at 18 years old, the average.
Mhm.
And the age of consent, what you would be considered as a minor, is 18 years old, supposedly. But there is a law that says that you need the permission of your parents before you get married. If you're younger than 21, then you would need
No.
permission from your parents. Like, see, like that's where it just kind of
Wow.
tricky. Like, I don't know what the age of consent is. Like, there are laws that
I
says you
don't
can
know if
start
that's the
drinking
government's
it.
fault, Chris, or it's a youth problem.
Yeah, it's like it's very confusing. But like for the sake of sake of specificity, and like for the sake of where this bill uh defines adolescence, let's go with 21. Let's say the age of
Dang.
consent is 21 years old. Damn, we're no longer teenagers.
See, I mean, like the United States also has that a little bit of a problem in which, I mean, you can get married at the age of 18 without a parent's consideration. You are considered an adult at the age of 18, but then you
Right.
cannot drink alcohol until the age of 21. So it's like, it's that, like, are you really an adult by society standards?
Right.
But I mean, it all comes back down to, in that it just also feels as though that bill is maybe not necessary. It's like so you're, because before including a bill, before making a new bill, we should kind of like think about it in that it's like people weren't concerned about this before and that they never had a bill. Like, I'm sure there are bills. I think especially, like, no matter what the country is, there's all these feel-good bills. But rather than having those feel-good bills, we should focus on what laws already exist and then actually implement those laws. I think what's going to happen here is that, like, I mean, from the sound of it, maybe it's popular. And so, like, let's say the bill it goes through. What's going to happen, like, years down the line is more people are, like, there's going to be another bill of similar stature. Like, to try to protect our kids, to protect, the economy. But, like, there's so many things that happen before you. Like, you do, like, let's just get this straight. The government isn't stupid, but at the same time, they're not, generally speaking, they're not focused on trying to destroy a certain group of people or try to destroy a particular like freedom. And so, like, what is it that the government is trying to do? Like, we gotta remember what the bills before happened, and then is it even being implemented? If that's the case, then, like, well, why are we adding more fake bills just to feel good? And that's a hard, honest conversation to have with like, the people and the government. But I think that's what needs to happen. I think what's happening in Argentina, with the president there cutting a bunch of certain departments, and now it looks to be like it's bearing a lot of fruit. There's a lot of that happens in government. A lot of things that, just like in everyday life, we could say that we had a certain New Year's resolution. We're going to do this and that, but then it doesn't happen.
Right.
It's like, but then imagine we actually implemented that, like, that imaginary bill upon ourselves. And then we put another bill on top of that with so much more speculation and different like things that go along with it. And like, no, we just got to stick to the original one. Again, every time you like, no, like, it's not like I'm going to be fit. It's like, no, I'm going to be fit, but I'm allowed to eat cupcakes. Let's add another amendment. I can eat, like, I can have my birthday cake. I'm going to add another amendment. No, it's like, just cut all of that and just focus on the principles on it. Because what's going to happen is the more you simplify certain bills, like just the purpose of the government, I think what's going to happen is the people are more going to be for you. We're going to be more for the government. I mean, who's the people that are for teenage pregnancies? Who are the people that are for more poor people. Like they don't exist. And I think there's also that it feels good that we're beating a certain group of people, like, take that. But it's almost just feeling good against an imaginary enemy. And sometimes I can see where it can be necessary for a leader to kind of arouse the people for a common good. But I think, in generally speaking, like this, for example, like it's not a matter of feeling good. It's a matter of what actually works. And why does that actually happen? I mean, there's so many things. And I mean, I'm just gonna like spit off some ideas. Like, more than likely, if you're worried about that, what about the idea, like what about social media and pornography?
Okay.
Like, what should the government ban pornography? What is
Let
considered
me
pornography? So there's so many of these things, and I think that bears more fruit than saying like we gotta give them more resources. Like, does
right.
the Philippines not have internet? Like,
What are you talking about? We have. Like,
that's
I'm
why
gonna
I'm so
get you.
confused. Like, what do you mean resources? Like, should the government then make a resource packet? Like, I'm sure they already exist. Maybe even in English or in a different language or something. It's like, so they don't necessarily have to put so many resources on that. I'm sure it
So,
already exists. And me saying is like, oh, like what if it doesn't? Like, well, I can bet money on it. Like, I'm sure it exists. It just needs to be implemented better. It kind of brings me back to the idea that, we as a people, as a population of 8 billion, humanity, we've gone so far into the into helping the lives of so many people that we have solved world hunger. And I like doing
right.
this example because we have solved world hunger. And what I mean by that is we have enough food to literally feed every 8 billion person.
Right.
The problem isn't the food, it's the management of. And so with this bill, like, we have the resources. I'm pretty sure we have the resources. It's the implementation thereof. And then I think helping people understand, like, there is hope, like there is maybe like living in a certain poverty or like fulfilling that familial cycle. It's not the end. And also, like, what should we do with people that have fallen into that embed? Is it like, oh, like, too bad, too sad? Like, that's the consequences. Like, I think there should be more resources in that. Like, maybe, like, because you have, like, as speaking for the guys, like, maybe because you're gonna be a future father, you gotta work 2x, 3x, 5x, 10x more
Right.
than the single dude, because like there's also that understanding that you are responsible. So you gotta freaking work your butt off for this kid who you've like consensually kind of made. So there's those aspects, and not just like, I still don't understand, like, the bill should, like, even if it is to just like tell people about it, I think also that's also just not enough. I think primarily if we're really talking about why teenage pregnancies things happen, like, I mean, the internet has a bunch of great things and a lot of negative, and I'm sure, like, I'm so positive that the primary cause, if birth rates has skyrocketed in terms of teenage pregnancy, I'm pretty sure it's because of pornography. Like, there's a bigger correlation there than people might want to admit. And
so let me try and put this in there, because like you said a lot of good things. And let me try and digest and respond to it. Like let me make it clear. Okay, I'm gonna make it clear right here. Like, to those of you who are listening, let me make my stand very clear. I am very against this bill, because I just said, like, in and of itself the bill is good, but like taking consideration of other factors, it is very, very bad. Number one, when you really look at the percentage of teenage pregnancies, and this is where the bill gets very misleading. It starts off with a statistic that says we have like this percentage of teenage mothers and we have this much. If you look at it historically, since 2017, the number of teenage pregnancies as a percentage of the population in the Philippines has decreased over time. In 2017, the percentage of teenage mothers who were pregnant aged 15 to 19 years old was 8.6%. Now, as of 2022, that statistic is 5.4%.
Let's go. We're beating
Yeah.
it.
See,
Well,
that's the thing. Like, we have a system that already works. And when you mentioned that there was already a
mhm.
bill, yes, there actually is already a bill in place. This bill was placed early on in the early 1990s. There was already a bill that talks about sexual education. We already have a bill that says something and addresses that problem. And yes, we should be focusing on improving and probably better enforcing that bill, or maybe even enhancing it a little, because now we've learned a little bit of what works and what doesn't. The problem the problem with taking so many things out of consideration, like the thing that scares me about this bill is like the need and the power to enforce it. In the bill itself, it says people will have the right to enforce this, and that parents cannot have authority. So you gave the example of how in the US, correct me if I'm wrong, the example that you gave in the US is in the US where they gave you permission slips, right? Because that doesn't happen in the Philippines.
Yes. So just to
Okay.
clarify, they give you a permission slip so you can opt out.
Right.
So you are automatically going to go to the class unless you, as a kid, remember to tell your parents about this, and then they sign it, and then you will then give that paper to your teacher. To
Right.
then you're out. And the majority of people, don't opt out. I think if I could remember correctly, only one or two out of, like, let's say 25, 23 people would opt out.
But it's there. But the option to opt out is there. It's possible. You still have a choice, right?
Yes. Although
Okay.
they're entrusting it to kids who, they don't like, oh, this is an important document. Like, sure it is. I don't know.
Right. So like just basically there. In the Philippines doesn't have that. We don't have that option to opt out. And in this bill, it says that parents cannot interfere with the sexual and reproductive education of the children. What this will mean is that whether you like it or not, whether it goes with your timeline of when you're going to teach this to your children or not, we are going to teach this curriculum starting at the age of 10 years old all the way until they graduate from high school. That for me is already a problem, because coercion, the law in terms of coercion for something that could be completely optional, it never always works out. There's always going to be some controversy to it. Any law has controversy, but the other problem with it is that it's trying to enforce something very specific to a group of families, that the problem should be addressed within the family unit. That is one of the scary things about it. The other thing about it is there are several parts of the bill that says that we have to put so many we have to put so much funding. There's going to be new departments, there's going to be new enforcement, there's going to be new laws and structures. The easy translation of that is there's going to be a need for a lot of money, and this is the justification to need to use a lot more money when we already have these programs in place. Like you said, we already have sexual education. It's already in the curriculum of public and private schools. Barangays and localities already have programs of their own, and there are already awareness programs in place. I do not have any idea what people are talking about, that we need more funding for it when it's already there in place. And if we're talking about like better facilities for teenage pregnancies, again, those are already in place. Why do we need to have another bill that says we need to put more funding into it? Most likely than not, there is some hidden agenda towards it. And whether that is corruption, most likely it is corruption, then absolutely it's going to be in there. The other dangerous part about it, in the last section, if you read the very last section of the bill, it says that any other previous law or any other law that has already been enacted shall be made null and void, kind of a sense, in order to have this law fulfilled. The reason that that is so dangerous and so scary is because there is in politics what you would call a slippery slope. If you put this law into pass and then you enforce it, it gives ways for possibly other bad laws to come into place. depending on how it's played out. But most likely than not, it is, and that is a very dangerous precedent to have in that law to say that any other bills will become ineffective when this new bill comes to pass. That is
Mm.
that is a very dangerous precedent to have. And when you look about it, the one of the things I really appreciate about the U.S. government system, you heard of the term stare decisis?
Oh yeah.
Have you? Yeah. Okay. So stare decisis basically says, right, like our interpretation of the law will be depending on how the judges rule on certain cases or how the judges say it's going to be. Like, okay, that's fair. The law should be flexible, and as we interpret it as we go, we should have stare decisis to have better interpretations of the law. And this new bill sets it up so that more bad laws can be put into place. I could see that a lot of judges in the future can use this for very bad reasons. Now, in that itself, now taking that into consideration, I don't think it should be enacted because it again sets the stage for other things in motion that will become very hard to stop because this bill is already in place. That is something that becomes very, very dangerous and something that I am very aware of and very against of.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, like I'm glad that you were able to just like put your foot forward and your feelings towards the bill. And you know what? I think we got to focus also on intention doesn't mean jack in terms of policy. I think we put too much emphasis maybe on the people who are making the bills. You know, like they're very popular, handsome, beautiful, whatever. It's like your intention could and I think, but at the same time, like this is not just that particular person who was elected's fault. It's the people who have also voted in that particular direction. Like, never mind the intention. If you can look at a bill, like never mind the intention, but actually focus on what it is trying to accomplish with the facts and logic that has come through on why they created that. It kind of reminded me of like this little short story. I'm gonna butcher it, but the idea is like there was once like maybe two guys like walking around, and then they
Mhm.
noticed that maybe they were just driving around, and then as they were driving, they noticed that there was a fence like in a particular area, and then
Mhm.
one of the guys is like, "Well, this fence should not be here because it kind of makes driving unpleasant," and it's like we should tear it down. And then the other guy says, you know what, you're right, but wait a minute. If you can tell me why this fence was created in the first place, then we can tear it down. So I think we should go back into that where, in terms of legalities, there were guardrails that existed before you're creating this new guardrail. What was that? Why was that previous guardrail in place? And does it have merit now? Because obviously
Mhm.
sometimes certain guardrails are kind of old and we need to move on with the times.
Right.
But in this, like especially with teenage pregnancies, and you were saying, and that is an important topic to address. But according to the statistics, it looks as though whatever thing happened, like
Right.
even with or without the bill, the problem is already kind of um, like answering its own question. Like it's already solving itself. And so, what's going on there? What is solving the problem? Why has it gone from, you said 12, I think, like double digits to single digits?
It was
What?
like let me like go check. It says here it was 8.6 down to 5.4
Okay,
percent.
8.6 to 5. Now, like, what has caused that? I think there should be more resources in like actual data, because
Mm.
it kind of just reminds me that politicians, they don't have to make 1,000 decisions every day that's incredibly essential. They only have to make one or two every day, like a CEO.
Right.
They only have to make one or two. So this is why they need to be well rested. They need to be well informed to be able to make so that those particular 1 to 2 decisions that they make actually has an impact that is beneficial for everybody. And so, I mean, like you mentioned, also there's also outside the intentions of that, there's also who those people are, and this is why character comes in play. Although the intentions might not matter as much, the character of the individual kind of needs to go far, because kind of reminds me of how the true leaders, they can see things that the average person doesn't see. Like a really great CEO can kind of see the sloppy waves, the rough waves they'll be approaching, and so they prepare their people. And at the time, maybe like certain people won't understand. It kind of just reminds me of the word of wisdom, in which at that time period, smoking, drinking is kind of something that one should do, and it's kind of that the doctors are saying isn't bad for your health per se. But then, I mean, this uneducated dude, Joseph Smith, is like telling people like, yeah, we're going to abstain from that. It's like, doesn't make sense at the time period, but then looking back, we can say, oh, like, so obvious. And so there's that level of trust that also we need to go by, but this is dependent on the character of those leaders.
Yeah, again, it has a lot to do with
what should individuals do, Chris? Do you think that they should do to, I guess, combat this bill, or like, what should they do regarding this bill that's being floating around? Like, is there anything that normal person can do?
I think that the way we're going with it, I think that there are a lot of people who are Filipinos who are expressing their concerns on social media and online and are standing up against it. In my opinion, there are not enough people who are even aware that this bill is out there. That's the first thing that's the first problem that we need to combat. And that's why we're also trying to do our part in trying to let people know about this. I'm glad that my friend was able to bring it up on social media and that I came across it, because that was how I gained awareness of it. And that's when I was able to start to do my own research and able to dig a little more into the facts. And I was able to find other resources. And number one really is awareness. There's still not enough people who are aware that this bill might even come to pass. I don't think they're even aware that there's talks and how almost official this bill is going to be. And that's number one. Number two is comprehension, is like trying to teach other people how this will affect them, because it will affect them. Number one, in terms of taxpayer money, this is where your taxes are going to. This is where it's going to be funded. And this is also going to set the precedent for other laws. This is going to affect so many other things. And number three is like, really, this is where it really matters, the people that you vote. Vote buying should be a thing of the past, because people are selling their votes to be able to uphold politicians who really don't have the best interest of the country. And so this is like baby steps. Be aware, comprehend and understand it, and then make sure that your vote matters. Talk about it with your local politicians as well. You'd be surprised how many barangay officials are willing to listen and to be able to express their concerns and to be able to forward these concerns. Start with understanding, stop with the ignorance, and start, voting wisely. This came to pass. We were in this very, very bad situation because for decades we have been letting people buy our votes, and we were just so politically and culturally unaware of what was going on. We got to stop that culture right now.
Wait, how do you mean by buying votes?
Literal vote buying. Like, you vote for X person, we would give you this amount of money. And we would see that in the ballots that you presented or in the proof that you presented. That's literally it. Vote buying. It's illegal, but it happens. It's still seeping through the cracks.
That kind of makes me think about, in some ways, the people vote for vote buying. Like, as much as it's easy to blame the politicians, those individuals are evil, rotten to the core. It kind of makes you think, like, remember, people voted for that. And maybe there's something that you're missing. I mean, the United States just had their election, Donald J. Trump, and he's a pretty controversial figure. There's a lot of people that are for and a lot of people against. Like, it's really in the United States have always been kind of half and half but
Right.
this is more half and half with more extreme and decisive like views upon this individual. And
Right.
so we got to be careful as well. Like if you are for Donald Trump, like recognize that there's people like that like you need the counterbalance to him. Like you need somebody
Mhm.
that maybe can see things differently from you, that can be critical on his actions. And that's a good thing because maybe you're going to be going too soft if something happens, and vice versa. The people that maybe didn't vote for him might have to like it might be good to recognize that he's not all evil, because I would hate to live in a world where like if I'm so strong and vindictive with my beliefs that what like 50% of the people I would hate because of their thoughts and beliefs. Like that's too that's a burden on myself. Like, that's a self-imposed burden,
Right.
and would rather you could just have an understanding that people might not agree with X, Y, and Z, but then you guys can still get along. And I
Right.
think that's what's happening. Like I'm not with the vote buying stuff. It looks as though people are buying votes, and it kind of reminded me like, didn't the Philippines have a Duterte? Uh, from my understanding on how the political world kind of happened, he kind of didn't want it, but then people kind of advocated for him, marketed for him, and he became
Right.
president because the people chose to do that. So maybe I'm not sure how it is politically now in the Philippines, but I mean, if there was a surge of that happening before, it now looks as though people are voting. They're voting with their actions, and then their voting is that maybe there's not an individual to that same level of free advertising, things like that. And so, what can you do? Like, this is what the people have chosen, and every choice has a consequence. And
Mhm.
there's going to be a lot of people in the crossfires that weren't too aware, and that's life. And I'm not excusing it or justifying it, but like what is the alternative? I can say like sit here and say like kumbaya that like everybody gets along, but like there's the real world out there, and there's consequences that your actions might have a consequence on the third, the fourth, fifth party.
Right.
Like
And
everybody's just doing the best that they can. And so like to kind of just reiterate, like people that are being bought with those votes, I mean, that looks as though that's what they're voting for technically.
right.
What can you do?
I actually think that I actually think that people are more resilient and more prone to do good than we think. We I think that no matter what the policy is, that we were doing so well. Remember, we had a policy about sexual education, and I don't think that it was because of that sexual education bill that we became much better and more aware. I think it had more to do with, if you really think about it, think about the people who got pregnant in their teenage years. What would they tell their children? They would obviously share the hardships that they face. They would educate their children more, and they'd be more aware. And as a result, we have less. And you would also see it in the hardships of the people. Like say you see teenagers who are pregnant, you would see the hardships that they go through and the struggles that they face. That in itself is already a natural de-incentivizer for teenage pregnancies, and I think that's one of the things that has caused that percentage in the Philippines to drop. Also, it's just more like awareness, like because we have more people who are focused on their careers, who are actually looking to produce income, and who are starting to know what their priorities are. They're going to focus more on education and reaping the benefits of education, which is getting a really good job. I think that is also contributing to the decrease of the percentage. We don't need another law
Mhm.
to help with something that is already in it of itself. Is There's already the people who are working towards decreasing that number, and we're not even doing it like kind of we're only doing it kind of naturally. It's all just happening as we go. We don't need another law that puts in precedence other thing or sets the foundation for other bad things to happen. And here's a little piece of good news though. When I was reading that law, it says that it would require the participation of the Department of Education. I think that's another thing that is being targeted. The head of the Department of Education. So you mentioned Duterte. His daughter is the vice president of the Philippines,
Oh,
and
what?
she is she's the vice president of the Philippines.
I didn't know that.
I really wish that she was the president. I really think that, in my opinion, she would have done a better job. But like, I think there was a reason she chose to run for vice president, and she's also the head of the Department of Education for the Philippines, like the entire Department of Education.
Mhm.
Now, if my suspicions are correct, this would require the Department of Education to comply more under this bill. And I think that's where they're trying to bind the vice president. That's my theory. It's
Mhm.
very conspiracy theory, but it's not too far fetched to think about. And if I
Uh,
really think about it,
Tin
I
Hat.
really yeah, I think that there's going to be she's obviously going to fight against this, and she's very smart, and I think she really knows what she's doing. I think she sees through the cracks, and she sees the actual intentions of this bill, and that she's going to fight against it. And so I do believe that there is going to be a good chance, made like not a super enormous chance, like a 55% chance that this bill would not come to pass. And I'm really leaning towards for it. I really think that the Philippines is becoming better. We're just not noticing it because we have all these people that say we need these bills because these bad things are happening. When you actually look at the numbers, like you said, it is not as bad as people think it is.
Well, at the same time, though, like just to counter that, isn't even 1% enough to start acting on it to accelerating its decrease? See, I think there's the humane part of me where it's like saying, humane, like the more empathetic side where it's like, well,
Right.
any percentage is almost too much, right? But then we got to recognize that people can make decisions. People can make decisions. They just gotta understand that it has a consequence to it. I mean, like, how are you? If you could be a ruler, right? Like, how could you make it to 0%? It's like, if you think about it, it's like, how can you make it to 0%? It's like, oh, you're gonna be a tyrant. Like, if you can do anything you want, like, and your sole goal is to make it to zero, it's like, that's not even a good thing. What is an appropriate percentage that is actually acceptable? Like, when you really think about it, as bad as it might sound now, what is an appropriate number that you can say that people are choosing this with all the resources that they have? And that's a personal choice.
All
And
right.
so,
I'm not too sure about like the numbers of it in and of itself. Like when you said that when you said it, like trying to get it to 0%, like I really think that's impossible. I don't think anyone should be focused on imperfections, less alone the politicians. Um, who was it? Like there was one U.S. president, and I really admire him for saying this. He said the worst 6 words you can hear. I am from the government. I'm
uh,
here to help. Who was
I
that?
believe that is, I don't think that was a president. I'm pretty sure that's Milton Friedman.
That was no, it wasn't Milton Friedman. I'm
Really?
100% sure. Yeah, let me look it up. Like I'm really sure that it wasn't Milton Friedman. Like worst thing you can hear.
Oh,
I
Ronald
am
Reagan.
Yeah, so there, Ronald Reagan was the one who said that. So I think that is an amazing president. I think that is one of the things that people should apply. We need less rules and regulations, not a total abolition of
Well,
all the rules and regulations.
that's funny
We
because
just need like
I'm not
less.
sure. Like, yeah, like more less regulation. I'm not sure how it's gonna work out in the Philippines. Like, each government has its own like pros and cons, right? And each one
Right.
should not necessarily model 100% the United States, because the United States government also has its own flaws. It kind of reminded me of I'm forgetting which thinker it was, but they were mentioning, or maybe even it might even be a president of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, where he mentioned that like we shouldn't like, I guess, always just think about like the pinnacle of a government is like the United States, for example, because then you could look at China at the time at this time period. China was booming, and doing really, really well. And
Right.
so, like, you couldn't, like, there's a level to it that China's doing that's not exactly like the United States, but you might need that a little bit more force. And like, once again, we don't know every single situation. If every government is like a family, even then every family is completely different with, different needs. And so this is why there's so many like different ones, and then like we give and take what is good and beneficial, and we kind of model the ones that are better at X, Y, and Z, because we're not always going to be the best at something. And so like the Philippines, I'm not exactly sure, especially with I mean the geography of the Philippines is completely different and unique, and
Right.
they have different responses with hurricanes and things like that. And so I'm not really sure how it's supposed to be, but
Yeah,
it just Mhm.
yeah, like coming off of what you said, like based on what you say, the Philippines shouldn't perfectly copy the laws of other countries because they have different geography, they have a different geography, a different culture, basically a different everything, and how it should be implemented, laws that should be implemented should be different. That is a good argument to have against this bill because this bill is so much trying to model the laws of other countries. If that at all was the intention. Again, I think there is another deeper intention for this law because we already have one in place, and this is just very very obsolete. I think it's a waste of taxpayer money and a waste of government resources and focus. Like this is just a terrible law to have, like,
Mhm.
not
Well,
even principle based speaking.
now you're talking now, like you talking about that kind of reminds me and think makes me think about like how the economic place can be made here. Like Singapore is a very popular Asian destination for a lot of companies, and it
Hmm.
makes me think, what company that is actually well known is based in the Philippines? And if we do have
You
a
want to
couple,
know?
which one?
You want to know? Okay, you'll be surprised. Like Meta.
Meta, the Facebook company?
Yeah, there is the Meta in the Philippines. They have they have an office here. Amazon.
Okay.
There's an Amazon here.
I mean, like like their LLC like is actually stationed there. Like,
Oh,
there's a
like
lot of
actually like
LLCs.
operating and
Yes.
like the full functions of the business is in here,
Well,
not
not
just
that
like
it
an
doesn't
outsourced
necessarily
IT
have to like
operations.
it's part of that. It's almost like there's a lot of like Amazon, Apple has a lot of their money banked in Sweden. I'm pretty sure
Right.
Sweden, the most one of the more neutral countries. And so like it's like that, like where or Singapore, right? Like is attracting a lot of companies to go to Singapore to station their
Okay.
bases there. I mean, what is Singapore doing that makes those companies enticed to go there? Like probably like security, probably like tax benefits, things like that. What's the Philippines like? What can they do to kind of help compete with that, right?
That's gonna be
Like,
a very interesting topic. Like when you brought that up, it just makes me think there is a reason why the Philippines was like coming from a developing, if not a first world country, we were at least a developing country, and we're back to a third world country. And there was specific laws in place that led to that. And I'm glad you brought it up. We won't have as much time to go into it, but like I've seen a couple of articles. I'll send those to you, and like let's talk about those, like the fall of the Philippine
oh yeah,
economy.
I remember being told that like at one point the Philippines was one of the richest countries in Asia, and I remember thinking to
Mind
myself, I was like,
blowing.
"What a liar! You're such a liar!" Like I think it was my parents, my dad told me, and I'm just like, "No way!" I remember I was there.
Yes.
Like you were
Yes.
telling me that was the pinnacle of Asian economics.
Yes.
Like whatever you say, old man. But yeah, it'll be interesting to actually do a bit more research and kind of find out more on the fall of the nation.
Yeah, we have to go into that. Like, okay, so we got to wrap up. Any last words on your end, and then I'll go and say my final piece.
Yeah. Oh, I'm just thinking that I'm not. I don't have a leg on any race in particular of that particular bill, but I think we should also just remember to be more civil and to recognize that not everybody's out there to get them, like to get us. You mentioned, Chris, that the particular politician isn't too popular. It's kind
Right.
of divisive, maybe controversial.
Right.
But I mean, I would hope that at the bare minimum, people kind of elected somebody that at least has the Philippine people in their hearts. That you might not agree with what they are doing, but they are trying to help the Philippine people. At the bare minimum, it could be from completely wrong policies, but their
Mhm.
intentions should at the very least be there. And I think generally speaking, they are. But as a person who, if you're able to vote and actually enact change, like this is where social media kind of helps, and being able to voice your opinion, like voting with your feet and with your voice, it goes a long way.
It does. My final piece that I will say to listeners out there is that, you know, this affects more Filipinos, and ignorance is never the solution. I would highly encourage you to know about the laws and to know about the policies in place, and to really look into what this is going the impact that it's going to do in our country, and to talk about it with other people. The other thing that I would try highly encourage people is, like I said earlier, is that I think that sexual education, or like any education, any kind of education that we're trying to do within the walls of our own home that we can enforce, like the solution is never to have the government teach your children what is right and what is wrong and how the world works. It is always more effective to have the parents who has real life experience, who has experiences that are tailored for the family unit, to teach their children. And so, if you are a parent who is listening to this, I would highly encourage you to be involved in the lives of your children and in the learning of your children. It is not too late to start. If by some miracle this bill doesn't come to pass, we cannot be complacent and say, okay, we can just go back to our daily routine. No, we have to start doing the things that would help what is best for our families, and that is all I have to say about it. So yeah, this is the podcast. This is a good conversation. This was a good episode. We'll see you guys in the next one. All
Yeah.
right, ciao.
Ciao.